The hospital room was silent, too silent. Even the faint hum of machines couldn't fill the emptiness that wrapped itself around the air like a heavy blanket. The white walls seemed to echo the tension that hung between the three people inside. The doctor, the mother cradling a newborn in her trembling arms, and the father standing rigidly near the window, staring out into the gray light of morning as if searching for something that would make sense of what he had just heard. The doctor's voice, though calm, carried the weight of finality. "I'm sorry," he said gently, taking off his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. "Your son was born completely deaf. We've run all the tests, there's no doubt about it." The words didn't immediately sink in. They hung in the air, suspended, as though time itself had stopped to listen. Maya Hargrove, still pale from the exhaustion of childbirth, clutched the baby tighter against her chest. Her heart ached so deeply that for a moment she couldn't breathe. She looked down at her tiny son, his small, perfect face, his delicate lips, his fingers curled into little fists, and her vision blurred with tears. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, there has to be a mistake. Maybe it's temporary. Maybe it's something they can fix." The doctor's eyes softened. "Mrs. Hargrove, I wish I could tell you that. But your son's auditory nerves never developed. Even with the most advanced technology, he won't be able to hear sound. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but please," Maya interrupted, her voice cracking. "Don't say that. He's just a baby. He hasn't even had a chance to live yet." Her husband, Richard Hargrove, turned from the window, his jaw tight. His face was sharp and composed, the face of a man used to being in control, to solving problems with money, influence, and force. But now all his power meant nothing. "You're saying there's nothing we can do?" he demanded, his tone sharp enough to slice through the still air. The doctor shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid not." Silence fell again. The only sound was the faint mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor beside Maya's bed. Maya looked at her son, her little Ethan, and tried to hold on to hope. She kissed his forehead and whispered softly, "You'll hear me someday, sweetheart. I promise you'll hear me." But Ethan's eyes, large and innocent, stared back at her with no reaction. He couldn't hear her voice. He couldn't hear the world. Over the next few weeks, the weight of that truth settled over the Hargrove household like fog that refused to lift. Richard threw himself back into his work, spending longer hours at the office, building his empire of glass towers and concrete power. It was easier to bury himself in numbers and deals than face what he couldn't fix. Maya, on the other hand, refused to give up. She spent every waking hour learning about sign language, researching new therapies, and visiting specialists. She would sit beside Ethan's crib for hours, tapping rhythmically on the mattress so he could feel the vibrations. "Do you feel that, baby?" she whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. "That's Mommy saying she loves you." Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he didn't. Years passed in quiet struggle. Ethan grew into a beautiful, curious little boy, with bright blue eyes and a smile that could melt anyone's heart. But he lived in a world without sound. He watched his mother's lips move, saw birds open their beaks but never understood what they sang. He laughed silently, cried silently, and dreamed silently. When Ethan turned 5, the doctors confirmed what Maya feared. "He will never hear," they said again. "There's no medical solution." The words stabbed her like knives, but she refused to let despair take her. She held Ethan's small hand as they walked out of the clinic, sunlight spilling across the pavement. She crouched down and smiled, though her eyes shimmered with tears. "It's okay, my love. You don't need ears to feel the world. You have a heart that hears everything that matters." But deep inside, something in her longed for a miracle, a whisper from the universe that hope wasn't foolish. One afternoon, while taking Ethan to the park, Maya sat on a bench and watched him play. He was fascinated by the world's motion, the way leaves fluttered when the wind blew, the way water rippled when he tossed a pebble. He couldn't hear the laughter of other children, but he could feel the joy in the air. That made her smile. As the sun began to set, a strange elderly woman appeared nearby, sitting quietly under an old oak tree. Her clothes were worn and simple, but her presence drew the eye. Her hair, white as snow, was braided neatly down her back. When her eyes met Maya's, Maya felt something stir inside her, an odd familiarity, like she was looking at someone she'd met in a dream long ago. "Your son," the woman said suddenly, her voice low but clear, as if it had been waiting to be heard. Maya turned, startled. I'm sorry, do I know you? The woman shook her head slowly. No, but I know him. I can see the silence that follows him. The silence that was never meant to be. Maya frowned, her heart pounding. What do you mean? The old woman gestured for her to come closer. Maya hesitated but walked over, leading Ethan by the hand. When she reached the woman, the stranger smiled faintly and reached into a small velvet pouch that hung around her neck. From it she drew something that caught the light, a pendant small and ancient with strange markings carved into its surface. It shimmered faintly as though it was alive. This, the woman whispered, holding it delicately between her fingers, belonged to those who healed through vibration before sound was born. They understood that hearing was not just of the ears, it was of the soul. Maya's eyes widened. What is it? The woman looked at Ethan and then back at Maya. It is something that must find its own host. Place it near his heart when the moon is full and you will see what the world calls impossible. Maya stared at her in disbelief. That sounds like magic. Like superstition, the woman smiled faintly. Magic is only science waiting to be remembered. Before Maya could ask more, the woman closed her hand around the pendant, kissed it softly, and placed it in Maya's palm. He was not born broken, she said quietly. He was born chosen. Remember that. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, the woman stood and walked away, her figure fading into the shadows of the trees until she was gone. Maya looked around, searching for her, but there was no trace, no footprints, no sound, nothing. It was as if she had never been there at all. She turned the pendant over in her hand. It felt warm, almost pulsing, and the symbols carved into it seemed to shift when she moved it under the light. That night, as the full moon rose high and silver light poured through the window, Maya couldn't sleep. She sat on Ethan's bed holding the pendant, debating whether she was being foolish. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. He will never hear. But what if just once she dared to believe? Her heart pounding, she fastened the pendant gently around Ethan's neck. It rested just over his heart. She brushed his hair back and kissed his forehead. If there's even a small chance, she whispered, let it be tonight. For a few moments, nothing happened. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Maya sighed, tears welling in her eyes. She felt foolish for believing a stranger's story. But then, something changed. The air grew still, as though the wind itself had stopped breathing. The curtains fluttered once, though no breeze came. Ethan stirred in his sleep, his little body trembling slightly. Then a low hum filled the room, a vibration so soft it felt more in the bones than in the ears. Maya froze. The pendant glowed faintly, pulsing with light. She watched, wide-eyed, as Ethan's fingers twitched. His eyes opened slowly, his gaze unfocused. Then he turned his head toward the clock. His eyes followed the sound of the ticking hand, something he had never done before. Maya gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Ethan, she whispered. He blinked, confused, then looked at her. She clapped her hands softly. His eyes widened. He smiled. He heard it. Her tears fell freely as she fell to her knees beside the bed, sobbing and laughing all at once. You can hear me, can't you? She whispered. You can hear. Ethan laughed. A sound so pure, so filled with life, it felt like the world itself had been reborn in that moment. The pendant shone brighter, bathing them both in a gentle light that felt warm and alive. For the first time in 5 years, by morning the house was alive in a way it had never been before. For 5 long years it had been filled with the soft quiet of a home that carried unspoken pain, the kind of silence that lingers in the corners of every room, that sits heavy at the dinner table, that hums behind every forced smile. But now that silence had been broken. Maya woke to the sound of giggles. Real bright bubbling laughter that echoed through the hallway. She sat up instantly, her heart hammering. For a second she thought she was dreaming. Then she saw Ethan standing near the window, tapping the glass as a bird chirped on the branch outside. He turned to her, eyes wide with wonder, and said softly, "Mommy, it's talking." Her breath caught in her throat. He had spoken again. His little voice trembled, but it was real. Tears filled her eyes as she ran to him, kneeling beside him on the floor. "Yes, baby, it's singing," she said, her voice trembling. "That's a bird's song." Ethan laughed again, covering his ears in surprise at how loud his own laughter sounded. "It's loud, Mommy," he said, grinning from ear to ear. Maya held him tightly, her heart overflowing with joy. Every word he said felt like a gift, every sound like a miracle. She spent the whole morning testing what he could hear. She tapped her fingers on the table. He turned instantly. She whispered his name from across the room. He looked up, smiling. When she clapped her hands, he giggled. When she played music for the first time, he froze, his eyes going wide as he tried to understand what he was feeling. The melody flowed through the room, and Ethan placed his hand over his heart. "It tickles," he said, "but it's beautiful." Maya could barely breathe. Her son, who had lived in silence his whole life, was now experiencing sound for the first time. She wanted to call everyone she knew, to tell the world that something extraordinary had happened, but she also feared that no one would believe her. That evening, she waited anxiously for Richard to come home. He had no idea what had happened the night before. She wanted him to see it with his own eyes, to feel the miracle for himself. When he finally stepped into the house, exhausted from another long day of meetings, she met him at the door. "Don't say anything," she whispered. "Just watch." Richard frowned, setting down his briefcase. "What's going on?" Ethan, who had been hiding behind the couch, ran out and yelled, "Daddy!" The sound of his voice filled the hallway, bright and pure. Richard froze. For a long moment he didn't move. The briefcase slipped from his fingers, papers scattering across the floor. His lips parted, but no words came out. Did he just... "Yes," Maya whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He can hear you." Ethan ran into his arms, laughing. "Daddy, I can hear you." "I can hear everything." Richard dropped to his knees, scooping him up and holding him tightly. His face, usually so composed, broke completely. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he kissed his son's hair. "Oh, my boy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "My beautiful boy." For the first time in years, the Hargrove family felt whole. They spent the evening laughing, talking, and marveling at every new discovery Ethan made. The sound of running water fascinated him. The ticking of the clock made him giggle. Even the barking of a dog outside filled him with excitement. Maya watched him like a mother seeing her child walk for the first time. But later that night, when she went to check on him as he slept, she noticed something strange. The pendant around his neck was still glowing faintly, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. She tried to unfasten it, thinking maybe it was unsafe to let him sleep with it. But as soon as her fingers touched it, a jolt of warmth shot through her hand. She gasped and pulled back. It wasn't hot, it was alive. She sat by his bed for hours, staring at it. The glow slowly faded as the night deepened, but the hum, the soft, steady vibration she had felt before, never completely disappeared. The next morning, Ethan woke up crying. Maya rushed to him, heart pounding. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" He covered his ears, his face scrunched in pain. "It's too loud," he said, his voice shaking. "Everything's too loud, Mommy. I can hear the lights. I can hear the wind. I can hear." He looked around the room, frightened. People outside whispering. Maya froze. There was no one outside. Their nearest neighbors were several houses away. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's okay." She rocked him gently until he calmed down, but her mind was racing. What had the woman given her? What kind of pendant could make a child hear things no human should be able to hear? Over the next few days, the strange incidents continued. Ethan began describing sounds Maya couldn't hear. Once he said he could hear the ground breathing. Another time he covered his ears and said, "The stars are too loud tonight." Richard didn't believe her when she told him. "He's a kid, Maya," he said, shaking his head. "He's using his imagination. Don't turn this into something it's not." Maya wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that everything was normal. But deep down she knew it wasn't. The pendant was glowing more often now, even during the day. Sometimes when Ethan got upset, it would hum louder and things around the room would vibrate slightly, like the air itself was reacting to his emotions. One night, she decided to take it off him. She waited until he was asleep, then carefully unfastened the chain. But the moment she lifted it from his chest, Ethan gasped and sat upright, his eyes flying open. "Don't," he cried, clutching at his chest. "It hurts when you take it away." The pendant slipped from her hands and fell onto the floor, but instead of clinking like metal, it pulsed with light and floated slightly before settling again. Maya stared at it in shock, her breath caught in her throat. "What are you?" she whispered. The next morning, she returned to the park where she had met the old woman. She searched every corner, asked every vendor, even showed pictures to people nearby, but no one had ever seen a woman matching that description. There was no record of her, no clue she'd ever existed. When she told Richard, he grew angry. "This is insane," he said, slamming his hand on the table. "You let a stranger give you some cursed trinket, and now you think she vanished into thin air. Do you hear yourself, Maya?" Tears filled her eyes, but she stood her ground. "Richard, our son was born deaf. Now he can hear. How do you explain that?" He had no answer. He simply turned away, running a hand through his hair. "We'll take him to specialists again. We'll get real tests done." The doctors were astonished. Not only could Ethan hear, they discovered his auditory range was beyond human. He could detect frequencies no machine could measure. His hearing wasn't just restored, it was enhanced. "He's extraordinary," one specialist whispered. "This shouldn't be possible." Maya knew then that the pendant had changed him in ways no one could explain. As time went on, Ethan began to notice more than just sounds. He could tell when people were lying, even if they said nothing. He once told Maya, "Mommy, Mr. Lewis next door is sad. He misses his wife." Maya asked how he knew, and Ethan simply said, "His heart makes a slow sound." He could hear people's heartbeats from across the room. He could tell when someone was scared or angry before they spoke. It was both beautiful and terrifying. Then came the night that changed everything. Richard, still uneasy about the pendant, decided to lock it away. "He doesn't need it anymore," he said firmly. "He's fine without it." He took it from Ethan while he slept and locked it in a steel safe in his office. For a few hours everything was calm. Then just past midnight, Ethan woke up screaming. The sound was so sharp, so powerful, that every glass window in the house shattered at once. Maya ran to him, terrified, finding him trembling and crying. The lights flickered wildly. "The noise!" he shouted. "It's gone, but everything's still calling me." Richard came rushing in, shouting for help, but before he could reach the safe, a deep, vibrating hum filled the entire house. The safe door rattled, then burst open with a deafening crack. The pendant flew through the air and reattached itself to Ethan's chest, glowing fiercely. When the light faded, Ethan's eyes were open, but they were glowing faintly blue, shimmering like moonlight. He looked at both of them, calm now, his voice low and strange. "Don't take it away," he said. "It's not done yet." Maya fell to her knees, her heart pounding. Richard stood frozen, unable to speak. The house was silent again, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt alive, as though the very air was listening. That night, neither of them slept. Maya held Ethan close, afraid and awed all at once. The pendant pulsed softly, its light steady and calm. Somewhere deep inside her, a truth began to take shape, a truth that terrified and years passed, and the world seemed to change with Ethan. What had begun as a quiet miracle in a hospital room had grown into something far greater, something that defied every law of nature. Ethan wasn't just a boy who could hear. He had become a young man who could listen to the world in ways no one else could imagine. By the time he was 16, his gift, or curse, had become part of who he was. He could hear the subtlest whispers of emotion in people's voices, the trembling sound of fear in a heartbeat, the flicker of hesitation behind a smile. He never needed to ask how someone felt. He already knew. When someone lied, he heard the false rhythm of their pulse, the shallow breath of deceit. When someone cried, he could hear the echo of their pain in the silence between words. Maya watched him grow with pride and unease. She loved her son more than life itself, but sometimes when she looked into his eyes, those deep, calm, unblinking eyes, she felt like she was staring at something ancient, something that had seen more than any human should. The pendant never left his chest. It had fused with him in a way that made it impossible to remove. Even Richard, now older and more somber, had stopped trying. He accepted that whatever it was, it had chosen Ethan. Despite his extraordinary gift, Ethan remained kind and humble. He didn't boast or seek attention, but word of his abilities spread. It began in small ways. A neighbor's lost dog found because Ethan said he could hear it crying miles away. A missing child returned safely after Ethan pointed rescuers toward a forest, saying he heard her heartbeat through the wind. Soon the stories grew. People started calling him the boy who heard the world. Journalists, scientists, and even spiritual leaders came to meet him. They wanted to study him, question him, understand him. But Ethan always said the same thing in his quiet, thoughtful way. "It's not a miracle. It's just listening the way we were meant to." He began using his ability to help others. He'd sit with people who were sick or grieving, and somehow they'd feel calm. He said he could hear when someone's heart was ready to stop, when someone's soul was tired of fighting. Once he sat beside an old man in a hospital and whispered, "You don't have to be afraid. The silence waiting for you isn't empty, it's peaceful." The man smiled through tears and passed away that very night, his face serene. But for all the good he brought, Ethan was not untouched by the darker side of his power. The more he heard, the heavier it became. He began to pick up things that no one else could, whispers that didn't belong to any human voice, vibrations that came from beneath the earth or from above the clouds. Some nights he would wake trembling, saying, "They're calling again, Mom, the ones from before sound." Maya didn't understand, but she held him close, trying to anchor him. "You're here with me," she'd whisper. "You're my son. You're safe." But Ethan would shake his head. "It's not about being safe. It's about being ready." As he grew older, he spent more and more time alone, standing barefoot in the backyard at night, eyes lifted to the stars, listening to something beyond the reach of human ears. The pendant would glow softly, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. One summer evening, when the air felt heavy with an approaching storm, Ethan came inside looking pale. He found his mother in the kitchen and said quietly, "It's time." Maya turned from the stove, startled. "Time for what?" He looked at her with a calm, almost distant expression. "The woman who gave you this," he said, touching the pendant, "she wasn't from here. She came to give it to you because I needed to carry it. But it was never meant to stay in this world forever." Maya's heart dropped. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" "You're scaring me." He stepped closer and took her hands. "You've always said love is louder than fear, right?" "Yes," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Then listen with your heart, not your ears. There's another world, the one before sound, before time. I can hear it calling me now. I think I belong there." Her knees weakened. "No," she said, shaking her head fiercely. "You belong here, with me, with your father. You can't leave. Please, Ethan." He smiled softly, that gentle smile that had always made her heart ache. "I'm not leaving you, Mom. I'll just be somewhere else. But I'll still hear you." Before she could say anything more, thunder rolled outside, deep and strange, like the earth itself was speaking. Richard came rushing into the kitchen, his face tight with worry. "What's happening?" Ethan turned to him and said simply, "Dad, thank you for teaching me what strength sounds like." The pendant began to glow brighter, flooding the room with light. The air vibrated as a low hum filled the house, the same hum Maya had heard that first night. The walls seemed to shimmer, and the storm outside grew wilder. Lightning flashed, but instead of white, it burned blue and gold. "Ethan, stop this," Richard shouted, reaching for him. But as he did, a force pushed him gently back. The light wasn't harsh or angry. It was warm, peaceful, like the embrace of something far beyond human comprehension. Ethan's hair lifted slightly in the static, his eyes glowing again, brighter than ever. "It's not me," he said softly. "It's them. They're opening the way." The hum grew deeper, almost melodic. Objects around the room began to tremble, but Maya barely noticed. She ran to him, clinging to him. "Don't go, please. You're my baby." He held her tightly, pressing his forehead to hers. "Mom," he whispered, "you gave me everything, life, love, and sound. I'll carry that wherever I go." Then, with a final burst of light, the pendant shone so brightly that Maya had to shield her eyes. The house shook, and the air filled with a sound that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. A chorus of tones like every song the world had ever known, merging into one perfect note. When the light faded, Ethan was gone. Maya fell to the floor, sobbing. Richard stood frozen, his face pale, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The kitchen was silent again, utterly silent, except for the faint sound of something clinking softly on the tiles. It was the pendant. Maya reached for it with trembling hands. It was cold now, its glow gone. She clutched it to her chest, crying until her body had no strength left. Days passed, then weeks. There was no sign of Ethan. The authorities searched, the neighbors whispered. The news speculated about a missing miracle boy. But Maya and Richard knew there was no point. They had seen what had really happened. Their son hadn't vanished, he had crossed into something beyond. Months later, the grief still hadn't faded. Maya barely left the house. She spent nights sitting in Ethan's room, holding the pendant, whispering his name into the silence. Sometimes she thought she felt the faintest vibration in her hand, but she told herself it was just her imagination. Then, one night, under a full moon, she sat in his room again, lost in thought. The world outside was quiet, the air cool. She stared at the pendant lying on the table beside his bed, its dull surface reflecting the moonlight. "I miss you, my love," she whispered. "I'd give anything just to hear your voice again." For a moment, nothing happened. Then faintly, so faintly she almost thought she imagined it, came a whisper. "Mom." Maya froze. The voice was soft like a breeze through leaves, but it was his voice. Ethan's voice. Her eyes filled with tears as she turned toward the sound. "Ethan," she whispered. "I still hear you," the voice said, gentle and loving. "Every time you speak, every time you dream. I'm never far." She pressed the pendant to her chest, sobbing. "I love you," she whispered. "I know," came the reply. "Love doesn't need sound." It never did. And then the room grew still again. But from that night on, something changed. Every time the moon rose full and silver, the pendant would hum softly, steady, rhythmic, alive, like a heartbeat. It was as if Ethan's spirit still lingered in that sound, a reminder that love once born can never truly be silenced. Years later, when Maya was old and her hair had turned silver, she still kept the pendant by her bedside. On her last night in this world, she held it in her hand and smiled as she closed her eyes. The faint hum filled the room once more, and the air shimmered gently. And those who were there swore they heard a boy's laughter. Bright, beautiful, eternal, echoing softly through the night. The world called it a